You don't get very far unless you take certain risks. There is that resilience that Brazilians have because we know what it looks like to go at rush hour and take a bus to go to work and barely make it inside of the bus because there's no room. The fact that we have an accent, it's an act of courage already. It means that you speak more than one language right off the bat. I always felt I was behind. I always felt less than, because I was like, first of all, I'm an immigrant in this country. I still don't speak this damn language perfectly. There's classes I had to take pre-classes for because I couldn't do English composition right away. And then I would look back home and I'm like, I'm behind. And that has changed. Over time, I realized that it was just a detour.
Priscila Pires is the Senior Sourcing Director at Kendo Brands. That includes brands like Fenty Hair, Fenty Beauty, Fenty Skin. I want to double check here that I have all the Fenty Fragrance by Rihanna, all of that. She's also worked at L'Oreal, at Shiseido, so she has a very interesting background. But the most interesting thing about Priscila is where she comes from and what her journey was and up until joining these big companies that we know and love. Joining us at the Adults Table is Priscila Pires.
Pri, welcome to the Adults Table.
Thank you.
What are you bringing to the table today?
I think I decided to talk a little bit about coming back to your roots. I think I read this thing in Sao Paulo, but I had read this before. It was something like wings to fly, but roots to come back to, or something like that. And I was like, that's kind of how I feel nowadays. And at this stage of my life, I feel like I've grown quite a bit, but having this sort of place to come back to and your origin, even as Brazilian living abroad, I think for a long time I suppressed that. So, we'll talk a little bit about my overall journey here in the US probably. But I think as I age, as fine wine, as my husband says, I'm trying to like rekindle with the Brazilian in me, which was probably there all along. But for me, as Priscilla, it took me a while to like accept and bring it to the table too, which I think makes a difference in relationships, work, and everything. So maybe you can relate living in a different country and trying to integrate with the culture, with a different language, different ways of being. And for me, I think it was super important to, I think integrate is the right word. I really didn't want to be seen as Brazilian. I wanted to speak English as well as I could. I wanted to, like, I didn't want people to keep thinking of me of this, immigrant thing. I was trying to hustle and bustle to get somewhere. And I think for the longest time, I suppressed, some beautiful qualities that we have as Brazilians that now I'm more and more becoming more aware of it and being more in tune with. So that's kind of what I kind of want to talk about a little bit today.
I can already relate. Although I've been here for 3 years only. How long have you been here for? Because it's been quite a while, right?
Yeah, so in January, it's going to be 20 years. And it's almost as long as I've lived in Brazil. I've lived in the US now. So I was 22 when I came to the US. I was actually doing the math right before we started talking because I couldn't remember how old I was. It's a while. And so it's kind of weird, because like people here probably perceive me as, Brazilian to some extent. And then when I go to Brazil, people tell me more and more, like, you're so Americanized. Like you've changed so much. And you become this sort of citizen of the world, but you have this feeling that you don't necessarily belong anywhere anymore. Like you're in Brazil. I'm from São Paulo originally, and what's left of my family still lives there. And I go there, and then I noticed I miss some of the elements of being Brazilian, like the sense of community, the sense of like you need help, you knock on your neighbor's door for whatever. I joke with my sister. I'm like, you're asking your friend for a suitcase so you can travel. Like if I was home, I would go on Amazon and buy it. Like I would never knock on my neighbor's door to ask for, to borrow a suitcase. And it's so common over there. Like, your things break, you go to a shop to fix, things break here, you throw it away and you buy a new one. There's just so many little things like that you just get used to some extent. And then you start losing this sort of to me, it's the sense of community, and I miss that actually being for as long as I've been in the US. You would think that I actually feel like I have a community here, and I don't actually. I
Mhm.
tend to connect with my friends from childhood, from my friends from Brazil, much more than with people I met here. Because I feel like they've known me for so much longer. A part of me that people here may not have seen or don't know. There's a huge part of your life growing up that is makes who you are, and it's always good to be in your roots. I feel like that's
Yeah, yeah. The suitcases example is hilarious, and it's so true. Or it's like, I need a jacket because I'm gonna go to, I don't know, New York, and it's super cold, and I don't have a jacket. Do you have one? Or even it's so funny. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, so you got here, you were 22 years old.
yeah.
I'm sure you had to restart your career. So did you move by yourself? What was the journey for you, when you arrived and when you started to build your career and start over here?
Yeah, what led me to the US was basically the ability to learn English, to like immerse myself in the culture and learn English as fast as possible. So I didn't come from a family of, a lot of money. So I was like, what is the cheapest, fastest, most effective way I can find to go to the US or anywhere and learn English and come back to Brazil so I can actually get the jobs that I've been applying to and I can't get because I have all the attributes except for the fact that I'm fluent in English. So I signed up to be an au pair in the US. So that's how I came back in 2006. It was the cheapest, most effective way to immerse myself in a place and culture. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So I was in my third year of business school back in Sao Paulo. I had done already my first semester of the final project, they have to do before you graduate. I basically told my colleagues and my friends in school, I was like, listen, I'm going to go over there and be a nanny, and some of them are like, you're crazy. Some are like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I could do that too. Or I wish I had the courage to do that or whatever. And so I came. So I signed up for this program. I believe it still exists. It's Au Pair in America. And I came as an au pair. The first family that I matched with was in Hawaii. So I thought I was really, really lucky, right? The orientation was in Connecticut when we landed, and there were like hundred something people that are coming from all over the world. And then they were like, "Oh, who is going to this? Who is going to over there?" And it was like, "Who's going to Hawaii?" And I was the only one that raised my hand, right? So everybody looked at me like, "Oh, you're so lucky," and I felt really lucky. At the time, I was into like scuba diving in Brazil and stuff. I was like,
Oh my god.
"Perfect," right? I get to Hawaii basically to substitute a live. No, no, she wasn't a live-in. She was a nanny for this family that happened to be Brazilian. So that's kind of that was the appeal for my application for this family because they just thought that they were going to replace a fluently, Brazilian person in English with another one, and then comes me with not a whole lot of English, right? Very young, the bit too wild, I think, for the family. I remember at the time like blogging and chat rooms were pretty popular. I'm kind of aging myself now, but it was super popular at the time. So I remember making these connections even before I came to the US, right? So there was like this guy that was working at a local YMCA. So I already had a connection when I got to Hawaii. And we were like partying, going to luau's at night, and I would come in the morning to, all happy and thinking it's all cool. I'm gonna take care of your kids, and I just came. I basically just showered and I'm here, and needless to say, we didn't work out as a match, and they basically fired me. And they're like, "We can't, we this is not going to work." And we had some disagreements with the living arrangements and all this stuff. Even with my broken English, I was assertive to some extent. And I was like, "No, this is not what we agreed." And anyway, so long story short, I rematched with another family in New Jersey. So I lived in Hawaii for 2 months, and I was probably the most tan person in New Jersey in February because, I have pictures. I have this white jacket. My face was, like, super tan. I was coming to New Jersey middle of the winter, miserable, and leaving, beautiful beach in the backyard to go play with snow, which I wasn't familiar with yet. Um, I guess it's also interesting to say that the first time I got on a plane was to leave Brazil to come to the US. I had never traveled on a plane
Really?
before. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a hell of a journey, let's put it this way. And it was, the family I matched, that the second family I matched with was perfect. They were amazing. It was almost like it was close to 2 years that I stayed with them because I did the 2 year program for the au pair. And it was fabulous. It was kind of like having this opportunity to do a different life, because I was used to go to school, working at night, and all these responsibilities. And all of a sudden, my responsibility was to take care of these four kids that I was basically a driver for them because they had so many activities and so much to do. And then once all the kids were in school, I started doing all my hustle work, because I had basically the full day to myself. So I would get like part-time babysitting jobs. I started working in a cooking school for kids. I was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then towards the end of that second year, I was going to college because it's a requirement for the program. And I was taking an international business class. And I met my husband in community college. And that was very fast, very spontaneous, let's say. Two young and dumb people that just thought they had nothing to lose. We met in September. It was like the beginning of the school year. And then by the end of that year, we got married on my birthday, which happens to also be today. Uh,
Oh my gosh, happy birthday. You're right. I forgot. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yes, 42 years young. So we got married, and then really the journey of living in the US as an immigrant really, the water finally hit my ass, and I was like, okay, now this is real life, right? You don't have the allowance anymore to go do things, and then reality hits you in the face very hard because your visa starts to expire, your driver's license expires, and then you're in this process of immigration and changing statuses. And we were too young, dumb, and broke. So I didn't have money to pay for lawyers. I had to do all the paperwork myself. And it was hard. It was I remember one of the hardest things that ever happened during this process was the moment that my driver's license expired because I needed that to continue working with the family I used to live with. What was my purpose if I couldn't drive? I couldn't help them. And that was still what I was relying on for money for a while. And then I was like, what the hell am I gonna do? Like I remember as if it was today. Like I never cried so hard in my life like that day. It was one of the most devastating days of my life when I realized, shit, I don't have the tool that I need to actually be in this country and do something. And at the same time, we're going to school, both of us, still going to community college and doing all kinds of hustles and whatever we needed to do to get, to pay rent, to pay insurance, to have something to do. We used to do like parties and he would bartend and I would be a waitress in the party. We did all kinds of stuff. And it took me a while to I would say probably 9 months before I finally got my work permit. That, okay, now I can be okay to do something. So then I finally got my work permit. And then I was like, okay, now I need to work legally, with like papers and insurance and all kinds of stuff. So I did all kinds of things. I was a waitress in a nursing home. I was a receptionist in a hospital for like volunteers program. I worked as a secretary in a outpatient program for mental health, which was quite interesting. I did all kinds. There at times I was doing both of these jobs at the same time because they were both part time, and while still going to school at night. School for me was always my thing. I was like, yeah, I need to finish this degree. I think this is super important. And then one day I remember I was as a secretary at the outpatient program, and I just looked at my husband. I was like, I want to go work in the city. And we were living in New Jersey, not that far from New York. And I just looked at him. I was like, I want to go work in the city. He goes, all right, right, whatever. So I started applying for jobs, like random jobs for whatever experience I had, because my goal was to go back to working in a company, because that's what I used to do back home. And there's an interesting thing about that because when you take time, let's say time off, right, from this path that you think you are, when you grow up, you go to college, you get a job, you get a career, off you go. And I felt I took a break from this sort of predetermined path. And for the longest time, I used to compare myself with my friends back home because I was like, these guys graduated college already. They had been an intern in the company that now made them in full-time employees. They've had all this time working already. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm still doing all these hustle jobs and trying to make ends meet, right? Like this typical Brazilian resilience, I think it comes to play in times like this. And I used to really feel behind. Like I always felt I was behind. So I always felt less than, because I was like, first of all, I'm an immigrant in this country. I still don't speak this damn language perfectly. I'm still studying. There's classes I had to take pre-classes for because I couldn't do English composition right away, right? And then I would look back home and I'm like, I'm behind. Like I'm behind. And that has changed. Over time, I realized that it was just a detour, but it kind of made me get further in a way as well. You don't get very far unless you take certain risks, right, in life, and you never know. So, and then one day I get a call from a company in Manhattan. And I remember my husband and I went to the interview because he took the bus with me to go to the city. And I did the interview as to be an administrative assistant to a specific group in this first beauty company. And then I did the interview. It seemed like it went well. And then fine, you go home and you're like, I don't know, probably not going to land anywhere. And then the HR person called me back. She's like, it's not going to work out for the job that you actually applied for, but there's somebody else in the company that's also looking for an assistant. And the fact that you speak Portuguese is an advantage. I'm like, go figure, right? For like funny, I come to the US to learn English and then being fluent in
Because
Portuguese,
of my Portuguese. Yeah.
it was what kind of made a difference on paper for somebody to think that it was worth to talk to me. And it made sense, because the guy was overseeing Asia Pacific and Latin America, and they had some businesses in Brazil. So it made sense why it would make sense for him to have some kind of interest in talking to me. So I did the interview. The guy was pretty dry, and I was like, okay, this guy did not like me, right? Like this is not going anywhere. And then a week or so goes by, and then the HR person turns around. She's like, we'd like to make you an offer. So I was like ecstatic. I was like, yay, finally, I'm getting into corporate America, finally, right? Where I wanted to be always. And again, still going to school, still doing my classes at night. That never changed. I think at that point, I was already I had transferred from the community college to university. So I probably had another year and a half, 2 years to go. So I started in corporate and in the beauty industry, which is what I've been my whole career, basically. I think this was back in 2008, 2009, something like that. And I started as an assistant, and then assisting one person in particular, but there was a group of other executives that I would also kind of help when time allowed. And one of these people, which is super important to me to this day, she's still my mentor to some extent. She was married to a Brazilian guy. And that's how we clicked. Because as soon as she knew I was Brazilian, she's like, my husband is Brazilian. It's funny how, I thought that I was always very removed from this Brazilian thing. And in reality, I think it's what kind of weaved through my experience here in the US. It's very interesting how that goes, right?
Mhm.
And when you say that
Mhm.
out loud, it makes even more sense. Um, and then she told me one time, she's like, I think you would do really well in procurement, which was one of the departments that I sort of assisted at the time. And I was like, there's no way. Like, no, I can't do that. Like, I wasn't confident enough yet. Right. And I used to sit in front of this guy and he was always yelling at people, yelling at suppliers, always having meetings and stuff. I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I don't know if I can be like this. And then I was like, and she's like, I think you would do well. And I was like, no, you're crazy. It's not it. And little did I know, an opportunity within that same company happened for me to backfill for somebody. And then I got the opportunity to go work in procurement. And I had no clue about anything. I was like, what is this? What is that? It's like I had a hard time. The first job was like tough because my boss decided to travel for a month. So there was nobody to sort of onboard me. The person that was there was already assigned to something else. So then yet again, I started knocking on every door that I could and make myself like, explain to people I don't know these things. I have all the willingness to help, but I don't know. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot and I made a lot of connections in this first job. And then I feel like everything that happened in my career after that opportunity came from connections from this first job. Because people move, people go to different companies, people change, and you somehow keep those connections somehow, some way. And then at one point, I was like, again, this idea that I'm always behind, that I need more money. I need more this. I need a better life. This is still not the life I want. And just keep going, keep going. I started moving from company to company until I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm okay now. One day I'm like having happy hour with this mentor of mine. I'm like, this is not working for me. They've made me non-exempt, so I don't make overtime anymore. I make less money now than I used to make before. This doesn't make sense. She goes, oh, well, I know someone that's building a team at this other company. Do you want to apply? I'm like, sure. So I went to the other company, did a couple of years there, was amazing, but too competitive for my taste. I didn't like the culture very much. And then again, somebody I knew from another company gave me like, hey, do you want to join this company? I'm building the team to work on, same things you're doing now. Do you want to come? I'm like, sure. So then moved again.
Yeah.
And then I was at Shiseido for about 3 years, 3, 4 years. And then someone again from the same sort of network that was my boss's boss at the time had an opportunity in Dubai. And then I was like, okay, I knew nothing about Dubai, to be honest. And I'm kind of glad that that was the case because I think if I had researched too much, I probably would have said yes. Um, I entertained an opportunity and I went to live in Dubai I did it almost 3 years in a job there.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, it was tough though, because,
Yeah.
my husband and I, we don't have kids, but we had two furry babies at the time. And one of them couldn't come to the UAE. It was a banned breed. So we decided that we're going to live long distance, for some time. Nobody knew how long it was going to take. Then pandemic hit and I couldn't come home for like 7 months. So I was, 7 months apart from my husband and my dogs for the first year. And then 1 year turned into two, then it turned 2.5. And then the rules and regulations in Dubai had changed. It took forever with paperwork to get these dogs set up to go to Dubai.
Yeah.
Everybody's moved to Dubai. And then about 5, 6 months later, my role was made redundant, right? I was like, shit, now we got to put everybody back in containers and move back to the US.
Lovely.
Yeah, so we did that. And then towards the end of my stay there, I had the opportunity to join the company that I'm with today. And it's been the company I've been with for the past 3 years. But it was a hell of a journey.
Hell of a journey. It bunch of detours, but I love what you said about connections, and I want to actually talk more about that in a second. But when you say, in the beginning you're doing everything that you could to not only learn but to belong, right? And repressing maybe some of your Brazilian side. Like, what do you mean by that? It was describe to me what that was like for you.
Yeah, so even during the times of my au pair years, right? All I'd hear all the time is like, "Oh, you're Brazilian, so you're wild, right?" And this would piss me off because I was like, "Yeah, I am wild, but I'm also responsible. I'm also punctual. I'm also this, also that, right?" So there's
Yeah.
sort of
Oh my
this
god.
stereotypical aspect of other nationalities that people have, and that used to bug me because even being in Brazil, I didn't necessarily have some of the characteristics that are very Brazilian. You say a party starts at 10 is because you're expecting people are going to show up at 11. And I was never like this. I was ever always 15 minutes early for an appointment. There were already certain things that are very typical of Brazilians that I didn't already subscribe to, right? Then all of a sudden, because I'm Brazilian, I'm being put in this box of wild, or the concept of corruption, or like this sort of the jeitinho brasileiro, like you always have a little way of getting things done,
Like sneaky and kind of like yeah.
sneaky or something, like there were certain things like that that used to really annoy me. And so I think that's kind of what happened. And when I decided that, okay, US is going to be where I live, you're right. I basically had no, I still don't. I have people that I know are Brazilians, live here in the US. I know where they are. They've been friends from childhood, but it's not people I interact with on a daily basis. I don't have Brazilian friends that I would say like that I interact with, on a daily basis. And so I didn't make friends as, with Brazilians. If I was already punctual and responsible and whatever, I was even more so, like, being here in the US, which may be very rigid in some ways. Like, even at home with my husband, he tells me sometimes, like, "You are you're home now. You're not working, you're not a director here at home. You don't have to be so rigid about everything." And that's kind of what I meant about losing a bit of that spontaneity of Brazilians, I became very methodical, very like organized to a point where it's almost like stressful for me. It's like, oh, I need to be on time. I need to get there early. I have to deliver. This sort of, I don't have a safety net, so I have to rely on myself. So I have to be extra responsible. I think that these are some of the elements that I feel like over time made me lose a little bit of this essence of Brazilian. And I used to joke because I always visit Brazil ever since, well, for 3 years I couldn't go because I didn't have papers to be able to come back. But once the immigration thing was in check, I used to go at least once a year. And I used to joke that I had to go to Brazil once a year, aside from the fact that I need to go see my family, but also to remind myself what it was like to be Brazilian. I don't know if that makes sense, but you're nodding, so I'm assuming it does. It,
Yep.
you have to go remind yourself what it's like to I don't know, to make lemonade when life throws you limes. Like it's to have this sort of joy of living and making do with what you got. And nothing is
Mhm.
perfect, but you're still on vacation. Like I go. I go more often now to Brazil, and this year in particular, I spent more time there than usual, and it's super interesting to see, right? Like, and how Brazilians have this ability to make fun of themselves for their own shortcomings. Like,
Oh yeah.
we're on the beach, yes, the electric bill is not paid, but we're on vacation having a good time. Right? It's like I'm like, "Oh my god, like, how do people live like this?" Like, how can you do this? Like, it's a
Yep.
concept that became so foreign to me now. I don't know, like, this fluidity of life, I lost that a bit, I became a
Mhm.
bit too rigid, I think it's the word. And maybe it was
Yeah.
because of the level of responsibility I had to do, and now that I think about it, I was like, it was your early 20s, early 30s when most people that didn't to go through these kinds of crazy life changes, they're not necessarily crazy, but different paths, right? Like there are people that are born, raised, and they live in the same place their whole lives, and that's okay. I admire people that can do that. It wasn't for me, which meant I sacrificed a little bit of being irresponsible, being a young adult, and being able to do whatever and deal with the consequences. I just felt I didn't have the choice?
Yeah. And then what happened? So now that you feel like more going back to your roots, or you have that internal feeling of like pursuing that, when did that happen? Because you mentioned, you turned 40. Was that related to the moment of life? Like, what happened?
You know, I I think there was now I'm in my 40s, and I don't know if it's because of that or not. It's because of the fact that I don't know. I feel like I'm in a comfortable place. No, knock on wood. It's job related, but yes, I feel like I've gotten somewhere where I feel like okay, I'm still young enough to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Now I have time to sort of reflect, because for the longest time you're on autopilot, you're kind of tunnel vision, you're not even looking at it. And I was like, now maybe it's the time to enjoy the fruits of my labor, literally, right? And I think spending more time in Brazil to me it helped, like kind of seeing a little bit more of the day to day, like life in Sao Paulo, life and spending longer period of time in Brazil, and then just feeling proud of my roots and feeling proud of my. And it's not that I wasn't proud of it, right? It was just that it
Yeah.
wasn't the focus. It was almost like coming to myself again in a way. This past couple of years have been very introspective for me. I'm not somebody very shy. I think it's kind of obvious that, but I, I've been thinking a lot. Like who am I? Like what are what are the things I like to do? Who was I as a kid? A lot of therapy, a lot of work. That my husband says it
Love.
doesn't help, but hey, I'm still doing it, right? There's a lot of like self-reflection really, on like how do I make life a little lighter? How do I,
Mhm.
worry less about certain things? There are certain things that, like, for instance, going overseas and losing my job, that was super eye opening to me. I had never lost my job like that before. Like, I was always the one resigning and moving somewhere else.
Mhm.
That was shocking to me, and I don't think I took the right time to process what that meant for me because I always felt like I don't have time. I have to go find another job. I have to keep moving. I have to, whatever. I don't have time to dwell at these kinds of things. And nowadays I'm like, maybe you do. And maybe you should.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you
The
do for you should.
the 40s are interesting, and I most of my friends here in Chicago are in their 40s, and we've had many of these conversations, and some of them actually, were guests in the podcast, and they mentioned something similar, that once like, it's just a time that it hits them that, like, "Okay, what am I doing with my life? Am I taking some time for X, Y, and Z? Or who am I really?" Or certain milestones in their lives made them start thinking again of who they used to be and people who have been in the US for a long time. Like, a very similar process from what you're saying, which is interesting. And in psychology and all of these things, they do say that this is an age that is very much about authenticity and really becoming who you are more wholly,
Yeah.
right? Not just I have to be this one thing or that one thing, but like owning who you are in that sense, which I think is very beautiful. And I wanted to ask you, so we're talking about the Brazilian roots and kind of like stopping to process some things, but are there other things that you feel like since you turned 40 started to just come up for you when you say like very introspective? What are some of the other questions that you think come up during this time?
Um, a very interesting topic for me has been spirituality. And it's so I'm not religious, but I'm highly spiritual. Does that make sense? I believe
Same,
in a lot of
same,
things and I don't
same.
subscribe to any of them 100%. Right? You're going to look at my bookshelf. I have a collection of oracle cards. I have yoga books. I have
Mhm.
Umbanda stuff. I'm interested
Me.
in everything that speaks to me. And that's something that I've always had, and I think this is also something very Brazilian because Brazilians are highly superstitious. They're highly spiritual. There's this sort of ability to connect with people. And I think that's the beauty of Brazilians, in fact, right? And my husband jokes with me. He's like, are any Brazilians like this? All kind of mystical and witchy. I'm
Yeah.
like, I think so. I think it's in the blood. So I joke with him sometimes because I'll go downstairs, I sit in the fireplace and I burn Palo Santo. I'm doing whatever, right?
Amazing.
And he's looking at me and I look at him, I'm like, you're married to a bit of a witch, right? Like, I'm just now coming to accept that. He goes, yeah, I've known that all along. And that's the funny thing, because sometimes, like, I think that I suppressed certain things about myself, but in reality, I just suppressed it to myself, I think, because people still saw me in some ways.
Mhm.
I think I still projected myself to the world the way I am, or, with certain things, but I just don't think that I myself had seen myself that way. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
It's very bizarre. But I think in the 40s, like, there are certain things that were super important to me a decade ago or 5 years ago. Money was one of them, right? Like, money is obviously super important to me. But there are other things that satisfy me, for instance, at work today that I probably wouldn't have thought of before. Understanding that sometimes your work experience, your life experiences, and just the ability of exchanging things with other people in your team encourage them to do certain things. That to me it was like, really? I had something like this at work recently. This kid that I work with, he started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And then he told me, he's like, yeah, you encouraged me to do it. And I'm like, really? I
Oh,
used
yeah.
to do it right back when I was a teenager and just talking to him about it. And then he tells me, he's like, yeah, you encouraged me to do it. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, I think you did it without knowing. And that's the beauty of it, right? Like sometimes there's an ego element that I also have to keep in check because it's very easy to think that, you're older, you're wiser, you know it all. But I like the ability to feel like I'm helping other people in some way, shape, form, and not necessarily in a mentor formal way, but maybe by example, right? Like maybe by allowing people to have the courage to do something this is what I get most excitement about at work now. It's when I see my team succeeding. To me, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Right? Like when you see them evolving, someone coming to the US not being necessarily fluent in English, and then 3 years later it's a total 180, right? Those
Mhm.
things to me is super fulfilling. It's not necessarily money related anymore.
And you know what? So I wanna go back to spirituality for a second because one of the things that I love and one of the reasons why I have a podcast is every time I talk to someone who I find interesting, who I wanna, learn more about, it's so funny that the moment that I talk to them, there is something that's so relatable for me at that moment that it really makes me almost, like, emotional. So when you said spirituality, that is my biggest search this year. So I was even talking to a few friends this past weekend, and we just had a full conversation, like 4 hours, 3 hours talking about spirituality. Because 'cause I've always been and maybe that is the Brazilian roots, right? I've always been super spiritual. I have a lot of faith, although I'm not attached to one religion, although I don't subscribe to, the organization of the religions, but I am very open, and I really believe in so many things, and I'm very interested in these things, and I feel like when you live life on autopilot and you have so many other priorities, sometimes it's hard to be intentional about the spiritual search,
Yeah.
uh, whatever that means for each person. But this has been every year. I'm like, okay, what's the most important thing for me this year? I'm not I'm not the person who creates very long lists, but I want to live intentionally. I just I want to be uh, I wanna be creating my life, not just being, a victim of my own life. So I always think, what's the most important thing this year? And then for next year, for me, it's very, very clear, which is spirituality. So when you said spirituality, I'm like, there it is, because I feel like they just come up.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're talking to someone, or even I'm seeing a new therapist now, and then I found out that he's extremely spiritual, and I'm like, okay, this is great. This is someone that can help guide me and things like that. So I wanted to ask you 1 second about this, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's totally fine. I know some people aren't, but I wanted to know what spirituality means for you and some of the ways that in your own search you're, trying to tap into this.
Yeah, I think to me, spirituality and vulnerability goes along side by side because there's this idea of there is something, someone you can call whatever you want, right? Everybody can call whatever they want. Believe it or not, right? Some people tend to be very rational, myself included, right? I've been always very brainiac, not so much feeling with my heart. But to me, being spiritual is that I think it starts from connecting with yourself. Like think when you're starting to learn and coming to be closer to who you really are, other things come to play and they somehow align. It's kind of bizarre. And it's almost like I do also have therapists, and they happen to be Brazilians. All my people are all Brazilians, right? My trainer's Brazilian, my therapist is Brazilian, and that's also important because it kind of keeps you again trying to root yourself on who you are, what your principles are, getting to understand yourself. I think that is a big part of the spirituality because, again, religions are a system, right? They're intended to be a certain way, and you may subscribe to them and it may work for someone. Totally fine, respect that. But a spirituality for me is starting within yourself. Like what is truth to you? Because I feel like it helps you guide your path. It becomes a little bit more connected to the truth of who you are. There's and that work is really hard. I'm starting that this year, like okay, and I started late this year, so I'm still very much into that. And as a good brainiac, I overdo it. Sometimes my therapist is like, okay, you've done this, this, this. Maybe now you just need to feel, right? Like, I'm like, yeah, you're probably
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Because then you start doing all the things that you believe in and you want to figure it out all very fast. And I think the beauty of it is that it's not a fast thing. And people evolve, right? Like we change. We change our ways of being, our environment change us, and you have to adapt. And I still believe that there are certain things that are very truth to who you are, that those things don't change, and your principles, your beliefs, your faith, right, on whatever it is, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, right? And to me, that's spirituality. For me, it's a whole lot about auto understanding. It's like,
Yeah.
how do I navigate this world? What do I want to be remembered for, right? Not the jobs I had, the things I had. Hopefully it's something bigger than that. And I think that's kind of how I've been going about it. It's kind of like learning a lot of different things, what speaks to me, what doesn't, right? Self reflection, a lot of trying to meditate because I have a hell of a
Mhm.
monkey mind. So I meditate, I get very anxious, I get very, antsy. And I realize that movement is something that actually helps me get into some of these modes that are incredible. Sometimes I work out and I start crying in the middle of a session. There's this feeling of like, "Ugh, I can't take this anymore," and I start crying. It's like the most bizarre thing. It's supposed to be a workout session. Right? But it happens, right? Movement is important to me. Breath is important to me. Like breath work works like a charm. I want to break through something, put me through a breath work exercise. I will unleash the crazy in me.
The movement piece is interesting. I feel like it makes sense because like emotions live in the body. So I think it makes sense that I think that's beautiful. But yeah, I do see spirituality through that lens as well. I feel like some people also have resistance to that word because first they connect with religion and second because they think that it's something outside of them.
Mhm.
So do I believe just in this one individual in the sky who's making all the decisions and who is guiding everyone's destinies and they have a hard time believing that, but I do see that as something that lives within you.
I agree.
It's 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 your wholeness, and some of us are just living in that split reality of just the material world, and this is, the life that we live in that we see. But if you want to, you can get in touch with that other side, which makes you whole,
Yeah.
right? And everyone has it. You and I share it, and everyone else that you see on the street shares it, and it's something that is within you. And I think that's very, very beautiful, and it's what I believe too. So I love that you said that.
We are
Um,
aligned.
we're aligned. We're aligned. But I think this conversation is important. I do think that, and I want to start talking more about it because I don't know. I think it's very easy to just get very anxious with our own existence here and really not having any sort of perspective, just thinking that everything that happens with you is the end of the world or everything that happens with you is just so individual and specific and exclusive and everyone else has it all figured out and you should have everything figured out all the time. You should have a plan, you should have a next step, you should know all the answers and if you're asking questions that's wrong. So I feel like we've been I don't know and with all social media and everything you feel like everyone has all the answers and you don't and whatever. So
So
I
much.
think that's an important conversation. But going back real quick to your Brazilian roots. So you mentioned in the beginning how that impacts relationships. I wanna hear more about kind of what are some of the things within you that you've, gotten in touch with again since this moment of going back to your roots, and especially how that has impacted your relationships or the way that you show up at work or, you know, how you show up in life in general?
Yeah, I think part of it is even bringing my circle into my culture. Like, I've been with my husband for a very long time, and he started coming to Brazil for the past 3 years. He never came with me to Brazil, right? And the first time he came, it was under some certain circumstances, but then we obviously went together a couple more times even this year. And for him to see, like for him to see through his eyes the appreciation of where I come from, or where I lived or how my people are, right? Like, or where my city, how my city is. And through his eyes, who, grew up in the US, is not necessarily born here, but basically lived his whole life here. And to see the appreciation through his eyes made me appreciate more as well, to some extent. But it was bringing him into it, right? Like, or him being willing to get himself immersed into my culture in some ways. To like be in a taxi over there and say like, oh, this is where I went to school, or like, oh, I grew up over here, like, whatever. That those things are, to me, it's important, and it encouraged me to talk more about it, right? Like in my job today, there are other Brazilians even within my team, and sometimes taking the opportunity to do a presentation about Brazil, to show the culture, and then seeing people appreciate the music, right? Like there is no music in this world that speaks to me more than Brazilian music. Like
Mhm.
the old school MPB speaks to me any day, anytime. And listening to that, and all the memories that comes back, right, from times and people and things. So I think it kind of made me want to talk more about it. It made me want to express more, all because the team I work with, my manager in particular, fully embraces the fact that she has a very diverse team from everywhere, which then makes you even more proud to feel like, okay, you're contributing to diversity. You come from a
Yeah.
background. You may approach things differently because of your background. And all the experiences I had here, from starting from whatever to be wherever, and I don't think it's the end of it yet, right? Life is still a long way to go, hopefully. It makes up who you are. It makes up how you approach the world, how you approach problems, how you solve problems, how you approach situations, sense of humor. Sometimes people recognize that about me. Like, you're in the middle of a crisis and you still crack jokes, right? Like, you still keep it
Mhm.
cool. Or I don't know. There is that resilience that Brazilians have because we know what poverty looks like. We know what it looks like to go at rush hour and take a bus to go to work and barely make it inside of the bus because there's no room, right? Like, we know what it's like to live with certain circumstances. And I think that makes us very resilient in many ways. And that shows in the way that you live with other people, and the way that you interact with people, the way you work, the way you carry yourself. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's kind of how I'm seeing it. It's really being able to feel it, show it to others that are important to me, and really feel comfortable sharing and
Mhm.
relearning too, because things change over time.
Yeah.
My references are very old when it comes to Brazilian culture, as I learned. Yeah.
So to wrap up, I think back to your journey from when you started, when you moved to the US to now. And I think it's really beautiful to see everything that had to happen for you to be there, right? And all the hustle and all of the detour and everything that happened. And it is the reality of most immigrants, right? Or many
Yeah.
immigrants, Brazilian or not, when they come to this country. And you've had such a beautiful and successful career. So what would you say to someone who is going through that process right now of maybe just, trying to start their own careers in corporate America and maybe feeling less off? I guess maybe focusing on that particular feeling of feeling less off. What would you say?
I would say continue showing up, and the fact that you are where you are already shows that you are brave, because you're coming away from what was your obvious pattern, right? Like, there is a strength in immigrants in general that we take forever to realize, the fact that we have an accent, it's an act of courage already, right? It means that you speak more than one language right off the bat, right? And you're making those efforts to do that. So I think sometimes you look at our shortcomings because we're comparing ourselves to the culture that you're immersed in, and all the things that you are that made you who you are, made you get to where you got, you almost take for granted. But it later you end up realizing that that's what made you get to where you got. And so the sooner you realize that, the better, right? Because it's not going to necessarily be easy. It is competitive. You're going to feel less than quite often, right? But to me, at least what helped me was to have some kind of like light at the end of the tunnel. There was always something that I felt like, okay, this is what I'm working towards, right? And the rest is sort of noise, including my own self doubt. It's a bit of noise, right? Because, and that, but to get to that point, it doesn't mean it's a straight line either, right? Like you just have to have the north, like the North Star somehow, whatever that is. And that can change, but that needs to exist because whatever life throws at you, you still know that you're sort of going towards something to keep you somehow focused, because it's very easy to feel less than. And it's very easy to think that because you don't speak the language fluently, because you have an accent, because whatever, right? You're less than. And and another thing too is just, to me that worked, right, was remember that people are people. Everybody's shit stinks. And because they have this title, because they have this corner office, because of whatever, they still struggle with things that you struggle with. They just have to carry on pretending they don't because they hold a position that expects them to look a certain way. And it was by knocking on people's doors and offering something, asking out of my way to, hey, can we have a coffee, right? Like looking at people as people helps because puts you on the same level of this idea of like, oh, they are more than I am. And having a career that worked from, let's call it the bottom, to me, people were always people, right? Like I worked with waitresses, cooks, chefs, cleaning people. To me, I always cared about their story because to me is a story of strength. And we don't always see that to ourselves at first. We always tend to compare ourselves to others because it's natural human behavior, you know? Um, to me, I think that's that. It's like having a north star and remembering then that human beings are human beings at the end of the day, and we all struggle with a lot of similar things. And because you don't have fluency in a certain language, or because as soon as you open your mouth people will ask you where your accent is from, it doesn't mean that you're less than. You should look at it the opposite way, because the person asking you that question doesn't have an accent, chances are, because they don't speak another language. So you should be proud of yourself, instead of not.
Man, love it. Super inspiring, Pri. Thank you so much for sharing all this. I really appreciate it and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was an amazing birthday present.
Happy birthday.